Hi, my name is Lee Falks. We're working for political change in this country all year round. And now we're going to talk about probably the most critical issue of all at this time, and that is housing. With me here is Brendan O'Brien from Flagstaff, Arizona, who's been studying housing issues in his graduate studies at NAU, that is Northern Arizona University. Hi, Brendan.
Hi, Lee. Good to be here.
Yeah, so I hear the universities all over Arizona, not to mention the country, they wanted to open up in like August or September, but that never really happened. So did a lot of students get sent home this semester?
I think it really depends on which university. I think a lot of people at NAU thought that they would be going in person, and then a lot of classes, if they were larger, never did. And there was the universities have a huge interest in keeping numbers high, especially without state and federal funding. They rely on increasing enrollment at all times and having students living on campus in order to keep that. So it's the situation is kind of like driven to create potentially unsafe conditions where people are living in close quarters and don't have other options because they've already paid for
Right. Yeah.
rent for the year.
Yeah, I heard a lot of landlords in Tucson are not giving students reimbursements. They were like sent home back in March. And they
Yeah.
had 2 months remaining, and they were trying to get reimbursements. And of course, the laws seem to be heavily favored in favor of the landowners. And I'm not sure what became of it in the end. As a student, you might know better than that.
Yeah, I think that's definitely right. I don't live on campus, but for a lot of on-campus students and off-campus, you sign the lease, you are stuck with it. You're going to be, you have to either find a replacement if they allow that, or pay to break your lease, which can be a lot more expensive if you're going back to pay a lease somewhere else already. So
Yeah. So have you spent the whole semester in Flagstaff, or did you go home during the
yeah,
semester?
I was in Flagstaff all semester and finishing out the spring semester there as well.
Oh, so you're back home in Iowa right now, huh?
I'm back visiting my parents in Iowa, and I just came back after Thanksgiving when our semester ended.
Yeah. All right. So what are you currently studying at NAU?
So I'm getting a master's in geography, which is a very diverse field overall. My specific area of study is about short-term rentals like Airbnb, the impact of short-term rentals on the housing market and affordable housing. And that's a big issue in Flagstaff because the economy is so driven by tourism. And so you have an influx of tourists and a lot of second homeowners, but you also have people who are living there who are trying to make this a home. And so short-term rentals is kind of where those two things collide, because you have homes that could be put on the market for long-term ownership or long-term rentals suddenly being shifted into the tourism market.
Well, it seems like the trend has been like in the past 40 years that billionaires have bought up almost everything. Now, I believe about 5% of the richest people in this country own almost all the land. If I'm wrong on this, please correct me. But even though, like, for example, I was born and raised in New Jersey, and there was a doctor in Upper Montclair, New Jersey. He owned the house outright. He was fairly rich.
Yeah.
But he still was paying $17,000 a year in taxes. So it's like he's got to rent the house back from the state for like $1,400 a month or whatever the exact number is. And it's like he's renting it forever, even though he paid for the house outright.
Yeah, there's there's a really stark divide, and yeah, I don't. One of the most interesting things in studying this is that they don't have good numbers on the number of people who have second homes overall, the number of short-term rentals that there are in certain areas. But time after time, I hear that every little change affects the housing market when it's a tight market, like up in Flagstaff or in a lot of towns that don't have room to grow. Flagstaff is surrounded by national forest land, so it really puts it in perspective where like there is direct competition between people who have a lot and people who don't have a lot, don't have much at all.
All right, so yeah, I've seen that trend be exacerbated for like every year for like 40 consecutive years, and I think eventually the pendulum's got to swing back toward, the middle class actually having some breathing room and some economic security. It's funny you mentioned Airbnb, because I thought of that as just like a place where people rent maybe 1 night, 2 nights at a place, maybe a week at the most. But theoretically, do you think the billionaires will buy up all the foreclosed houses after the evictions, foreclosures, and they will rent them out long term as Airbnb? Is that the trend that might be developing right now?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question. I don't know for sure, but one thing that is pretty telling is Airbnb. That's just one of the most prominent of the short-term rental or vacation home rental market. They were set to go public and with their shares on Wall Street back in the summer, I believe, and they put that off, and I think they let go about a quarter of their employees with COVID, and people applauded them for the way that they did that and how transparent they were, because they didn't know what to expect moving forward. But then they just went public in the last couple of weeks, and shares are skyrocketing. Like they're Airbnb is doing fine in terms of turning a profit. A lot of places are down, similar to hotels, but there are many places that Airbnbs, people trying to keep their distance and everything, like people are still traveling and staying in Airbnbs as opposed to hotels. And I'm wondering if that will be a continued trend. So they will become even more profitable while also not having any direct property themselves. And I think it could definitely happen where people see it as an investment and they buy a second home or a third home or fourth home and put it up as Airbnb instead of letting someone who lives in that area occupy that space.
Yeah, that's an upward wealth consolidation, which I've seen increase every year for like 4 decades straight. And yeah, you mentioned when you think about Airbnb, Uber doesn't own any vehicles. Then you got Walmart and Amazon. Their workers are producing tremendous amounts of wealth for the shareholders who don't have to work at all, who don't have to sacrifice and wear out their cars and houses, and all the money's going to the top. Whereas the people who produce the wealth are getting, they're running on fumes, basically. And so you got 2 economies. You got the stock market economy, where the landowners are making tremendous amounts of money this year. Then you got the real economy for the rest of the people, who is just tanking.
Yeah, it's really concerning because, and you just saw in California, they passed the bill after voters had already approved that Uber should have to treat their employees, their drivers, as employees. it got overturned through another referendum, which was highly financed by Uber and other vendors like that, to allow them to pay employees as independent contractors with none of the benefits. And I think that it sends a shockwave through everything, because so many people are in unstable situations right now, and they're looking for extra income or some security, and it just further emphasizes that, like, there's not a lot of protection.
You know, the Uber drivers, like Airbnb, who rent out the rooms, have already had their Social Security cut, because there is none. They could do Uber for 40 years, and at the end, they'll have no Social Security, no retirement, no health benefits. The Uber just started to offer health benefits, but it's privatized. You got to pay for it.
Yeah.
It started out at like $100 a month, and then they could double it if you dare use it. It could go up to $800 a month, and then you basically have to cancel it. It's the same vicious cycle we've been in for like 3 decades now.
Right. Yeah, that's one of the things that I'm trying to emphasize in my research is talking to different city officials. They'll say again and again, like, oh, this is like this new technology, this disruptive industry. We're trying to figure out how to regulate it. And while the technology, the platform of the platform economy, I don't want to say the sharing economy, that's kind of a misnomer, but it's not new. It's just a new iteration of this this trend that's been happening for 40 years and for much longer, of taking of creating a frontier where there wasn't one before, and erasing all competition. And it's not really hard to regulate if you intend to regulate it.
Right. Starting only about 10 years ago, we had this new economy called the gig economy, based on like Uber, Airbnb. It's basically based on the cell phone, or the smartphone, that is.
Right.
And it's only about 10 years old. And so we're dealing with a new frontier here. Mm-hmm. So the reason we're doing this video is because we want to bring political change to this country when the economy is controlled by a singular Democratic Republican Party. By the way, that was the original name of the Democratic Party back in the 1890s. It was called the Democratic Republican Party. They eventually changed the name. And now we're back to, it's like what goes around comes around. Now we're back to basically the same party. They merged more or less. And they were originally the slave owners party of the South. And back in the 1790s, they're the oldest political party. Well, now they're just called the Democrats. But since they've merged with the Republicans pretty much, I got Nancy Pelosi and Mitch McConnell both denying us any kind of assistance at all, unless you got $1,200 a year, which is a joke. They've gathered together to defeat the people, and they agree on about 80%. Okay, they might disagree on, say, abortion and gay marriage. That's about it. Economic issues, they're pretty much the same party. So anyway, I wanted to ask you, what do you want to do about the fact that these parties have virtually merged into the same party?
What do I want to do about it? A lot. I think one of the biggest things is just having conversations like this, because what you said is pretty accurate. Like, the people running these parties do agree on the vast majority of things, and it's to benefit corporations and to concentrate power and influence. I think when you get down to it, if you actually talk to people face to face, which is more difficult right now, I understand, but if you level with people, the vast majority of us do agree on 70–80% of things. It's just, and we agree that corporations have too much power. A few politicians have too much power. The income inequality in our country is wrecking us. And we get tied up into these into this tribalism of getting lured by a single issue to retreat to our corner and block all progress. And I think there's this myth that if you don't retreat to your corner, then the only way to come together is with a moderate view. But I don't really accept that idea of left and right, and the moderate is the balancing point. I think there's a corporate level and a democratic level, and those things have come at odds. So what I'd like to do about it is keep having these conversations, talking to people, whether we agree or not, because I do think on the vast majority of issues, we might have different policies of getting there, but most people agree that in a democracy, every person should get a right to have their voice heard and have more direct impact than voting for a few people who are going to decide policy every 4 years. And so I'd like to radically shift things toward local politics, local decisions. And I think that relates very closely to housing, where you have a lot of policies in place that make it more difficult for cities and communities to decide their own path forward, or what makes sense for them. And I think people at the local level have the best tools and on the ground information to decide the policies that will work there.
Yeah, I've been living in Tucson for 24 years now. And during that time, both my kids were born and raised here. And one of them just graduated the University of Arizona in May. The other one's, he's about to graduate in economics. He's got like a year and a half to go. And so I've been a Tucsoner for quite a while now. Anyway, I did a 4-year study as a high school government teacher. I looked at a study, a 4-year period between the years 2015, 2018, when Tucson had approximately 13,000 evictions. If you average that out, that's about 9 per day. And that was before the pandemic. Now, if you got 9 per day and they held them up for say 270 days, if you do the numbers, that's what you got, almost 3,000 evictions coming up. They have been piling up, kind of like you put a dam on the river. Then it breaks the dam, and then it comes like a tsunami. We got a tsunami of evictions coming up in January, which I've never seen in my entire life. Maybe you have to go back almost 100 years to see this. Now, if we got 3,000 in Tucson alone, and Tucson is just a microcosm of the rest of the country, what do you think about this potential 30 million nationwide, 30 million evictions coming up in less than a month?
Yeah. It's disturbing. One of the frustrating things that I've come across is that every city official or politician will speak to housing problems in their neighborhood or in their city. They'll speak to a housing crisis if housing prices are skyrocketing, or they'll call it a supply and demand issue, but they won't make the necessary changes to do it because, and this is an uncomfortable part of housing, but most people build up wealth through their home. And if you were going to build, if you went into a community that has a really tight housing market and you built 1,000 homes at 50,000 lower than the listing price, everybody who has who's planning to build up wealth from their home suddenly will not make anywhere near that level of what they might be hoping for, because there's a lot more choices. So people aren't going to pay $350,000 on a home if there are 100 homes going for $300,000. And so back to your question on the eviction crisis that's impending, I'm not sure of the best way forward. It's clear that politicians don't hear us, and eviction is oftentimes something that feels it's intensely personal, and people feel a sense of shame with it, even if they recognize that they had no control over the situation that they found themselves in. And so I think one of the biggest things is making that public knowledge that this isn't an individual thing. This is happening on a wide scale. And I think rent strikes will happen and should happen on a much larger scale, because I think that's one of the only ways that we can be listened to. By striking, by boycotting, by withholding our funds, that's one of the only methods that we have to truly be listened to.
All right, so the National Low Income Housing Coalition, that's NLIHC, they did a study of 940,000 tenants in Arizona, almost 1 million tenants in Arizona, who are about 23% of those are considered to be extremely low income, which is classified as a family of 4 living on $24,000 per year. The income, I'm sorry for this long-winded question, but anyway, the income required to afford a 2-bedroom rental at fair market value is $38,000 per year. You need $38,000 in Tucson, for example, which is pretty much a median American city. You need $38,000 to have a decent living, but about 1/4 of the people are making only $22,000, just barely half of that. And it's like the landowners can raise the rents as high as they want and pay you as low as they want. And it seems to me most Americans are just struggling. They're on the verge of eviction. And then it said among 215,000 people in Arizona who need affordable rental housing, there's only 55,000 affordable rental units. So that's only about 25% are available. So 75% of the people who want lower rents cannot get it. It's simply not available.
Yeah.
And there's in 2018, there was 1,223 new apartment units in Pima County. And most of those were at the University of Arizona, these high rises going up for the very wealthy students. And only 3% of these new units in 2018, new housing units, only 3% were designated affordable housing. So the housing is not being built for, struggling people. It's being built for the wealthy.
Yeah.
So what do you say about the huge discrepancy that has developed in recent years between full-time workers, many of whom work at 50, 60 hours a week, not being able to make enough money to pay these oppressive rents?
Yeah. That's a good question. There's been this trend going on, I would say, similar to a lot of things for the last 40 years, of cities competing against each other for high income residents and residents who will pay more in property tax, who will spend more money, who just have more money. And there's, as I mentioned, city officials will speak to the need to provide affordable housing, but if they have an opportunity to lure higher income residents to the city, they're going to do it, because their mindset is, oh, we can be more secure with our budget. And they're not getting, it's true that a lot of cities are not getting the state help or the federal help when it comes to housing as they used to. And they're like putting out all these incentives to lure higher income, especially white 20 and 30 somethings to the area. And with the pandemic, I'm worried that that's going to be exacerbated because so many people are working, so many more people are able to work remotely right now. And there is this trend of, I don't know how much it's been seen in the data yet, but a lot of people are speaking to it. Like people are fleeing from larger cities who have the means to do so. And why not go to a Tucson or a Flagstaff or an area that's beautiful where you can get outside and find rent that's affordable to you based on your income, which is coming from based on a New York or California or larger city income. And essentially what you get is, and this kind of speaks to the whole issue, is you have people within a community who are tied to that community, who are working there and making wages there, competing against outside money. And this isn't an issue of we should hold it against those people who are moving in. I think that's where it oftentimes plays out, but these are policies that are allowed to take hold because cities are like laying out the welcome mat and putting incentives for these people to come in.
Yeah, I graduated Syracuse University back in the 1980s. And on campus, I was living on like maybe $150 a month. I mean, I had no money. But on campus, you had rich people, middle class, poor people. But we all lived in the same dorms where it was really like bare bones dorms. There was almost no luxury housing there, almost none of it. Even the rich kids lived in the dorms with us. But nowadays they're creating in campuses like the University of Arizona or Syracuse, you name it. They're creating this luxurious housing which didn't barely existed 30 years ago. And the further separation, like some of my roommates were actually rich, some were poor, some were middle class, but now it's like they're being separated. Like University of Arizona, they built these huge high rise. It started to look like Manhattan, where they attracted super rich, and some of them come from like Saudi Arabia, like sons of billionaires, and they, all over the world. They're just very rich people, and they just care about getting the money. They don't care about American students getting a good education.
Yeah, and it ends up like this kind of speaks to the situation where people you develop the animosity toward the other students or toward those individuals, but they're just the effect of the policy. They're not the ones instituting these policies. Many, like if people don't have the option of living in a high-rise loft or expensive condo, they will take what's offered to them. And for a lot of students who, a lot of college students, they've been pushed to go to college and they feel like that's their only option. They might gladly live in a cheaper, maybe not as fancy place, but that's not an option because what's getting built is these large buildings in Flagstaff. People refer to them sometimes as monstrosities, and they do change the whole culture of a place, and they do cater to this this class divide that doesn't need to be there. It's catered to by policyholders or policymakers.
Yeah, they did in 2016. They did a snapshot in Tucson of the homeless. On January 26, 2016, they counted over 1,700 homeless living in Tucson, and they also calculated the amount of vacant housing units. Now, for every homeless person in Tucson on that particular day, there were 65 vacant housing units, like apartments, houses, etc. So why do we as a society have such an abundance of housing units, yet they go unused while so many people suffer and die in the streets?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I mean, that kind of sums up where our priorities are, right? Like early on in the pandemic, people weren't traveling. This was back in maybe April. So Las Vegas, which gets tourism from all over and is so dependent on tourism, emptied out. The hotels were empty, and they were showing pictures of they had set up homeless shelters in parking lots where they'd spray painted lines. This is how you keep your distance. You're in this area, you're in here. And these hotels were empty, like tens of thousands of potential spaces for this homeless crisis. And so the word crisis is really crucial because you have beds available, you have spaces available. Obviously, there are other services that might be needed for a lot of people, but it said a lot that housing is healthcare. If you have the ability to provide housing, which you clearly do in this situation, and you're putting people out on the street in a parking lot and saying like, oh, this is your space, this is what we're setting aside for you, it really makes it clear like where is the heart in that. It's all driven, it's not even driven by money, it's driven by it's driven by
Apathy?
what's that?
Is it apathy?
Yeah, I was going to say this feeling that certain people don't deserve this. They don't deserve a home. They don't deserve healthcare. They don't deserve a fair education. And if we're deciding that, that really tears the cover off of any facade of a fair and just society that we might have had to begin with. And it's troubling because it's easy to go about your day and feel cut off from these issues, or to see things like that and be outraged for a second, but then feel lucky that you have a space of your own. But collectively, we need to decide what is important to us. What are our priorities? Because the more we isolate and just appreciate what we as individuals have, the more these things keep happening. And I'm someone who believes if we keep turning a blind eye to these things, we are complicit in them because they demand immediate, widespread collective action.
Yeah, okay, so I want to ask you one, I'm sorry for my long-winded questions.
No worries.
Interview. I want to ask you like a two-pronged question. For the upcoming year, new year in 2021, do you have any resolutions either for yourself or for the entire country for this upcoming year?
So a personal one is I'm busy working on my thesis right now, and I've been, one of the reasons that I delayed, there was a big gap between undergrad and grad school for me. And one of the reasons I delayed that is because I didn't want to just be cut off in academia. And one thing I'm trying to do with my thesis is I don't want it to be just a document that allows me to graduate and move on. I want it to be grounded in evidence that I've found about affordable housing crises that are happening in the Western US and throughout the United States. But I also want it to push for changes, to advocate for specific policies that are based on how to address these things. So kind of that fusion of activism and academia, that's a big goal of mine in writing this thesis. And yeah, I think collectively, one of the big, a resolution I would have for all of us is that we stop seeing ourselves as such individuals, and we embrace this connection that we have to each other, that we have some faith in each other. And I know that's hard to come by right now when we're so divided and forced to look to our representatives to save us. But I think one of my biggest resolutions for myself and for us collectively is that we don't lose faith in each other, because I think that's where we're at right now, is we have lost a lot of faith in what a democracy is and what it can do. And I would like to see us forget about trusting our representatives to do the right thing. They are not going to do the right thing. The only way they do the right thing is if they're forced into a corner. And the only way that happens is when we all come together around an issue that really matters.
Yeah, it seems like in my lifetime, it seems like capitalism has become the national religion where they worship the Trinity, me, myself, and I. And maybe we should try to reverse that trend and actually try to have some humanity in this country, because I think what we have coming up, I'm going to just share my screen here. I got this one thing I want to share.
Sure.
And it's something that they're going to spend U.S. taxpayer money on, printing out maybe up to 30 million of these eviction notices and putting them on people's doors. I mean, if you want a job working for the sheriff's department, I guess you got good job security. But the rest of us, they put up these eviction notices on the houses. And but I'm really concerned that 30 million, up to 30 million Americans could be evicted in less than 1 month from now, starting in January. I just think it would cause a lot of chaos. Anyway, Brandon, I'm sorry for being so long-winded.
Oh, no, you're fine. You asked some good questions.
Yeah, I really appreciate, we're gonna have to bring this to a close, because I really appreciate you speaking out on this. We need every one of you from every state in this country speaking out. So if you like this video, please hit the like button, hit subscribe, and share it. Thanks again, Brendan, I appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks, Lee.
All right, we'll talk again soon.
All right, take care.